Hello all, I am Dr. Parul Malhotra, Associate Professor, Jagannath University, Jaipur. In my previous videos related to models of communication, we studied about the uses of models of communication. We also talked about limitations of model. Then we also studied in some important models like Shannon and Weaver's model, Aristotle's model, Osgood's model, Wilbur-Schramm model, Lossing model, as well as the Boileau's model. In this video, we'll talk some contemporary models that were developed later on by Frank Dance, by Newcomb, and by Wesley McLean, and Riley's model of communication. So to begin with, we'll start with the Newcomb's ABX model of communication. The Newcomb's model of communication was introduced by Theodore M. Newcomb of the University of Michigan in 1953. He gives different approach to the communication process. The main purpose of this theory or of this model is to introduce the role of communication in a social relationship society and to maintain social equilibrium within the social system. He does not include the message as a separate identity in his diagram, implying it only by the use of directional arrows. That is, he does mention sender and receiver, but message is not shown as a separate identity. Message is only shown by the use of the directional arrows. I'll just show you the model in the next slide. You will understand that. Through this model, he wants to concentrate on the purpose of communication, not how message moves or what is the channel, how sender is encoding or decoding the message, but he wants to establish the relationship between sender and receiver, and also what is the purpose of communication. So this is the model which is different from other models, does not focusing on the movement of the messages, does not focusing on any kind of noise or feedback or how the encoding is done, but it focuses that how communication can be well maintained for maintaining good relation, and what is the purpose of communication. Sometimes it is also called as ABX model, or sometimes it is called as Newcomb's model. In previous models also we had studied that Boileau's model was SMCR, Osgood's model was a circular model, Shannon and Weaver gave mathematical model, so Newcomb gave ABX model of communication. So this is the Newcomb's model of ABX. That is, X is the topic here, and A and B are the senders and receiver, and these arrows everywhere in the model are known as the messages. So it is like that A and B are sender and receiver simultaneously. One is sender, the other is receiver. The next moment the other is sender, and then the other is receiver. It happened in the Osgood's model. That the sender and receiver are exchanging the messages that are shown through the arrows. And what they are exchanging, what they are talking about is denoted by the topic X. And the space between the triangle that this model makes depicts the social equilibrium, or the, you can say, the social balance between the A, B and X. I'll explain with the help of an example that A is the sender, B is the receiver, and X is the matter of concern. The relationship between A and B is like a student and teacher, government and public, or a newspaper and reader. Sender and receiver may work in a same flow, but at the same time some factors like X may affect their flow of relationship. It may be a third person issue, topic, or policy. This is what. We are just understanding this much. That is, A is newspaper, B is receiver. A is newspaper and B are what we say the readers. Then we have A is teacher, B is student, or A is government and B is the, you can say, the employees or the public, right? And X is any of the issues that are affecting them, maybe class timings, class test marks, examination, some policies, rules and regulations. It can be any topic which is actually A and B are talking about, right? This is one thing. Now let us move to the next step. That is, let us take an example of teacher and student. Teachers introduce a new policy to increase the college timing from 6 hours to the 8 hours. So here the A is teacher B is student, and as we talked about, X is any policy or issue. So here the issue is the timings, the college timing from 6 to 8 hours. If both students and teachers are satisfied with this policy, then the communication maintains its balance, its equilibrium status between them. But if students are not okay with this, of increasing the timings from 6 to 8 hours, then the flow of communication becomes in trouble. Then it is the responsibility of both A and B to convince each other so that the adjustment is done and the equilibrium, the balance is maintained. Let us look at another example. Suppose A is the management and B are the workers, and X is again, you can say, the incentive scheme or the working hours, right? So management decides to increase the working hours, or management issues a new policy about incentives, which is not liked by the employees. If it is liked, then the flow of communication is maintained. But if it is not maintained, if it is not accepted by the employees, then yes, the equilibrium is disturbed. So the A, that is the management, has to adjust or try to convince with the B, that are the employees, so that the adjustments can be done. Maybe the adjustment in the policy they have to make, or they convince students, or they themselves convince, and so that the equilibrium can be maintained. And this adjustment, this negotiation is shown by these two bigger arrows, that they are trying to negotiate their sayings to relate it to that topic so that the space between them is maintained. So this is what Newcomb wanted to show through this ABX model, and I hope you can very well now understand that how it is different from the other models. It does not show the movement of the messages or the channel or any kind of noise or feedback, but it simply talks that A and B keep on talking to each other with the matter of concern, that is the X, so that the equilibrium between them is maintained, right? Now let us move to the next model given by Dans. In 1967, Frank Dans has proposed the communication model called Dans Helix model for a better communication process. The name helical or helix comes from helix. This is Dans helical model, and this name comes from helix, which means an object having a three-dimensional shape like that of a wire wound uniformly around a cylinder or cone. This model shows communication as a dynamic and a non-linear process. Dance's model emphasized the difficulty of communication. Frank Dance uses the form of a helix to describe the communication process. He developed this theory based on a simple helix, which gets bigger and bigger as it moves or grows. This model again does not show the movement of the messages, no sender, no receiver, no feedback, no noise, but it talks about the evolution of communication. It talks about the socialization process in the life of a human being. That is how communication evolves, how communication is a dynamic and a non-linear process. Frank Dance explains the communication process based on this helix structure and compares it with communication. In the helix structure, the bottom or starting is very small. Then it gradually moves upward in a back and forth circular motion, which forms the bigger circle in the top, and it is still moving further. The whole process takes some time to reach. As like helix, the communication process starts very slowly and defines small circle only. The communicators shared information only with a small portion of themselves to their relationships. It gradually develops into next level, but which will take some time to reach and expanding its boundary to the next level. Later, the communicators commit more and shared more portions by themselves. Let us see this model. This is the model, and if I explain it, we need to explain it from the bottom. That is, the communication starts with a very small, you can say, horizon in a person's life, and it expands till the infinity. You can see infinity, that shows communication is a process which begins from the death of the person and continues throughout the life, and it keeps on evolving and keeps on changing. It is small at the beginning, but it slowly and steadily moves to a bigger circle, and it is infinite, it has no ending. I'll explain this through this cartoon. You can see a child is born, he is at the bottom of this helix, right? He plays, he moves, he studies, he goes to school, then makes new friend, then workplace, then marriage, then so you can see the number of people involved in his life, influencing his attitude, influencing his life, then the interactions that he has daily in life is constantly increasing. And why infinity? That it is never ending. It's not that he ends communication, he says, I've learned a lot, I've learned enough, I don't want any kind of communication. This is practically not possible. So this is the best thing that is you can easily, I think that you can now you easily understand this process, this helical model of communication. So when a child is born, the only means of communication for him is crying. He cries for everything, hunger, pain, cold, if he is wet, anything. As the child grows, the means of communication become wider and broader. He learns to make noises. Then he learns a language to obtain attention and to fulfill his needs. As a helix, the process of communication in this case started as crying and later it developed into a complex and compound meaning. That is, it is ever evolving. It is never stopping and it is expanding with the every stage. The helical model is largely dependent on the cycle of a child that he learns to pronounce a word in his elementary classes. And throughout his life, he uses that word in the same way he learned. Just like that, we used to react to certain things in a certain way in our childhood. And such reaction and habits last with us forever. The communication evolves in the beginning in some simpler forms. Then the same process of communication functions and develops based on the past activities. Thus, his way of communication or his reactions may also differ from the past behavior and experiences. It develops further with modifications according to the situations. Therefore, the model concludes that the process of communication is like a continuous curve with some changes or flexibility. The base of the helical curve lower level can be affected or altered at any time accordingly the experience of an individual. Right? Now let us move to the next model, that is Wesley-MacLean model of communication. In 1957, Wesley and MacLean's model of communication is proposed by Bruce Wesley and Malcolm MacLean Jr. Being one of the creators of journalism studies, Wesley served as a teacher at the University of Wisconsin-Madison between 1946 to 1968. Malcolm was director of University of Journalism School 1967 to 74 and co-founder of the University College at University of Minnesota. This model can be seen in two contexts, interpersonal and mass communication. And the point of difference between interpersonal and mass communication is the feedback. In interpersonal, the feedback is direct, whereas in the mass communication, the feedback is not immediate, not direct, and it is slow. So this is the Wesley's gatekeeping model of communication. X1, X2, X3, X4, and Xn, that is various sources of information, and then A, C, and B are the other elements. Wesley and MacLean realized that communication does not begin when one person starts to talk, but rather when a person responds selectively to his or her physical surroundings. This model considers a strong relation between responses from surroundings and the process of communication. It says communication begins only when a person receives messages from surroundings, and each receiver responds to the messages they receive based on their object of orientation. Like here we see that is in X1, X2, X3, X4, these are all the different news articles and the different news information that a person receives, right? F is here the feedback that has been received. Then A, client, we have readers or audiences B, and the C is the gatekeeper, the person who checks the messages, the person who checks the messages. So A are the clients, you can say the PR agencies or anything. B are the final receivers, and C are the, you can say, the gatekeepers. So it says that A is receiving messages from various sources, X1, X2, X3, X4, and so many sources and so on, right? And what happens is, at times it also happens that C, that is the gatekeeper, are also directly receiving the messages without the intervention of any kind of mediocre, that is A. this loops reflects that. You can see that there's an arrow moving from x3 to C, x4 to C, and what happens is the C gives back these messages to A, right? And what A does is, A actually filters the reality, checks, keeps checking. A gives those messages to C, they keep on checking the messages, and then finally, the final approved messages are given to the B. This is how actually it works. That there is clients, and then we have the readers and the audiences as the B who are actually receiving the message, and gatekeepers are acting as the filters. A daily newspaper normally receives many press releases from many public relation agencies on behalf of their clients. In this case, newspaper will publish the selected press releases due to the space constraint. So here, our clients A are the, what you say, are the press agencies, or the, what you say, press public relation agencies, and C, the gatekeepers, they filter what kind of information should go to the reader, and also which is important that would be published, right? So this is how this model is working, that C are acting as the gatekeepers, the filters. Alright. Now let us look at some other things also. X1, X2 and X3 are press releases, feedbacks, as I have mentioned. Then we have feedback loop between reader and newspaper, that is FBC. Feedback loop between newspaper and client, we have a feedback loop. Then we have a feedback loop between the reader and the client also. If the message is directly received by the receiver, that is the reader, they can give the feedback to the agency. But normally in what cases, what happens is, these messages are all first of all received by the news agencies. They filter the message, that is the C, and then they give it back to the receiver. So this is what this model actually wants to convey, that is a gatekeeping aspect, that is checking and rechecking the content. There are lot many sources of information in our lives also. We do not give every information to every person. We filter the information, we decide which information has to be given to people and which not. In the similar manner, newspapers also work. They receive n number of information, and their responsibility and accountability is higher as compared to a normal individual, because a newspaper or a TV channel, they are catering to large number of people. For them, filtering becomes more important. So they check all the resources, they check all the information, and then they give this information to their readers. Now let us come to the last model of our social communication of this unit, that is Riley's and Riley's social system model. John W. and Matilda White Riley, the husband and wife team of sociologists from Brunswick, published many articles together on communication. The Riley couple developed a model to illustrate the sociological implications in communication. They discussed their ideas about communication theory in an article entitled Mass Communication and the Social System, Sociology Today in 1959. The basis for their idea lied in the work of Aristotle and Rosswell, and they pointed out the importance of sociological view in communication in another way. So this is their model, that there is R and there is a C. These are all the primary groups. These are the bigger circles are their larger social structure, and they are exchanging the messages S, right? So by C we mean communicator, and by R we mean the receiver. Communicator is again the sender here, and R is the receiver. They have their own social structures, they have their own primary groups, and they communicate messages with each other. Let us explain this model. In the above model, we can see the large group 1 and the large group 2 comes under the overall social system, that is the communicator and receivers. Communicator and receivers are interdependent by feedback. It's a kind of a two-way communication. This model helps to solve the dispute between the two groups within a larger social system. It creates better understanding between the groups. By the larger social structure, we hold that communicator primary group A1 and A2, they represent the larger social group. Then larger social group 2 hold receiver primary group B1, B2. Receiver is representing the larger social group. Here we need to understand that those who are the primary group in primary group might be your friends, relatives with whom you can share a degree of intimacy. See, this actually says is that C is a sender and R is a receiver, and this is their social structure. And everyone has their primary group. Like my primary group would be my family, or maybe the people who influence me the most. Similarly, the receiver's primary group would be their own primary group also. So whenever they are communicating with each other, they are much affected by their primary group. We are actually not affected by much of the secondary group. Who are the secondary group? Like you can say, with whom you do not have regular social interactions, like maybe the shopkeepers, the vegetable seller, or the neighbors you have. They are all the secondary group. They hold importance but less important. But who all are the primary group? Your best friends, your nearest family members, maybe your nearest colleagues are your primary groups, those who actually affect your communication. And whenever we are communicating with the people, so our communication is also affected by the primary group which we are part of. I can explain here this with an example, like if a child who has a primary group of a studious students, friends of a studious student, then his intellectual level automatically develops, and it reflects in his behavior also, that with whom he share his groups or ideas, right? On the contrary, if a child is more with the hooligans or the bad guys of the school, then what happens? The language, the behavior of the child changes, and accordingly it reflects in his mannerism and in communication. And then if he is communicating with the other people, then they, through his or her primary group, can rectify their behavior. So it is like the communication that we are making with our primary, with the sender and receiver with each other, it is also affected by the group we are part of, the primary groups, and not the social group. Right? I hope I have well explained all the models and all of you are clear with the concepts of models of communication. So thank you so much. Here I end my video.